All right, welcome back. It's the last session of the day, and it's on, as I said, undergraduate student well-being. And I would like to introduce the chair of the session, Andrea Belgrade, institutional research and academic planning analyst at the University of California Office of the President. And also Andrea did her PhD, right, at University of Michigan at another CERU member institution. So we have a network there. So welcome, please take it away.
And actually undergrad at University of Minnesota. So I'm like,
oh wow,
hitting up all the major
exactly
sites. Yeah, thanks, Igor. So first, I just want to thank all the presenters for sharing their work with us, so we can learn from you all, think about our own work, think about how to improve our own practices based on your findings and innovations. So I really appreciate that, and I'm sure everyone else here does as well. So to start things off, I was just hoping that each team could just introduce themselves, maybe provide a quick background of what might have motivated you or inspired you to do this work, either more broadly or like this project specifically. I think it's nice to know where people are kind of coming from on these projects. So let's begin with Cassandre Alvarado at UT Austin, presenting The Kids Are Not All Right.
Thank you so much. I'm Cassandra Gigar Alvarado. I'm a professor at the University of Texas at Austin, and I've been part of the CERU team for quite a while now. And really the genesis of my project was to try and make use of the amazing data that we were collecting from CERU during the COVID era. I'm talking specifically about the 2020 and 2021 undergraduate surveys. But also try and make use of it in a way that helped grow and develop our faculty into a deeper and better understanding of what was happening with students. What often happens, I think, sometimes is that we, as leadership, get amazing data from CERU. We look at it, we go, okay, yeah, yep. And sometimes we don't necessarily take that next step to turn it back around and operationalize it, and particularly to operationalize it to faculty. And so my presentation really focused on the idea of going beyond sort of university level data and really taking the opportunity within what CERU provides us to look at data specifically within an academic college and then within particular academic programs to really try and bring home the message to faculty about what their students were experiencing. I think in the age of COVID, it was very easy for all of us to say, students are struggling, faculty are struggling, we're all struggling. But what we hadn't yet done is take specificity about what we saw with our students and turn that around into something that faculty could see, but better yet, not just see the data and go, yep, okay, students are struggling, but then to provide faculty with that next step of, okay, when students are struggling, how do we connect the idea and what we know that students are struggling with the actual resources that exist on campus. And what we were trying to do is really make sure that faculty reinforced their important role as first line aid in supporting students who were in trouble. So specifically looking at CERU data, not just at a university level, but acknowledging that the challenges that students, for example, in the Moody College of Communication might be having could be different, and in this case it was, than the challenges that students in the Cockrell School of Engineering were having. And so acknowledging that our faculty needed to know and understand what was happening with their students at a very different level. And I think making sure that we make great use of these CERU data to really help faculty in particular know and understand how they are an important part, not just in knowing well-being, but in acting in ways that support student well-being.
Great, thank you. Now I'll turn it over to the team at UC Berkeley, including Andrew Eppig, Kiyoko Thomas, Ruben, Candeo, presenting using UQ's data to inform campus basic needs policies.
Hello, welcome. Andrew, I'm an institutional researcher in the Division of Equity and Inclusion at UC Berkeley. Just to let you know, my co-presenters are on the road and may or may not be able to connect, but they're with us in spirit, if nothing else. And our presentation really came out of work that we've been doing at Berkeley for almost a decade now in terms of our basic needs center growing out of smaller initiative to address food insecurity at campus and has grown into basic needs more broadly, not just for students, but for staff, and has become a UC-wide, in some ways, a national project. And part of that was that it was intimately tied to UQ's data and helped get off the ground with UQ's. And so we wanted to tell part of that story of not just the creation of the Basic Needs Center at Berkeley, but how there's been a real back and forth between UQ's and the policies and practices on the ground, and then back to re-inform the survey as our basic needs questions have grown over the years in responding to what we're seeing from practitioners on the ground. And it was a really important for us to sort of show that taking UQ's data and bringing it out of the sort of abstract and some of the sort of, you get the survey, you run the results, you put something on a website or a report, and then you're done. And that it's more that it needs to then be brought to decision makers, tell them what's happening, and to regularize that process. There's a institutional, it's not a one-off thing. It happens on a regular basis, it's every 2 years at Berkeley. So, there's an update as things are coming. And that that's one direction of part of it. And the other is looking at the analysts working with practitioners and service providers and really getting that ground level view of what's happening. And one, helping those practitioners to understand and use the data themselves. It's not just for high level decision makers. It's how can people understand the data at the local level and use that to inform their work, and then also have their work informing the survey, informing the analysts, and to make this really wonderful ecosystem of collaboration so that we can support our students better. And that was sort of the story that we're trying to share and grow.
Great. And now tuning in, I think, quite late at night from India, if that's where you're currently located, we could show a little, I guess, extra appreciation for Mousumi Mukherjee from OP Jindal Global University in India, presenting student well-being in India during the pandemic.
Hello, everyone. Am I audible?
Yep, can hear you.
Thank you for the appreciation. It's way past midnight here, but I really wanted to join this symposium as I received the invitation from Gigar, because frankly speaking, this was a really exciting project to work on, and we actually ran the survey, the special COVID-19 survey that Sero had designed. And this is the first kind of student experience survey ever that has been run in India. Unlike in the United States, where you have such a long 20 years old tradition of institutional research and systematically gathering data on student experiences. Frankly speaking, in India, we absolutely don't have data available at all with regards to student experiences. It's one of the largest systems, second largest system of higher education in the world, as all of you know. But unfortunately, there has not been a long tradition of educational research as such. And there is one report that comes out every year from the Ministry of Education in India, which is the All India Status of Higher Education report, the ICE report, which is the basic statistics of enrollment and graduation. And just the basic statistics of student enrollment and graduation, and nothing more than that. So it becomes really difficult for researchers, those who really want to know about student experiences, and there is no data available. Now, why we decided to run this study? I personally, along with a couple of my colleagues at our university, in the middle of the pandemic, the first semester when we transitioned to online teaching and learning around the world for the first time, we were really curious about, how the students received this kind of transition. So we ran a small pilot study at our own university here at Jindal Global University. And thereafter, I kind of came across, I used to receive the newsletter from the Center for Studies in Higher Education. I work here at the International Institute of Higher Education. So we receive newsletters from similar centers around the world. And I received this newsletter, and there was a call from Igor asking for international partners to run this special COVID-19 survey. And we responded to that call, and Igor very swiftly actually responded to the email and gave us permission to run the study in India. But of course, it's a very different higher education context. So we just could not run the survey as such, because there were terminologies used in the survey which the students here might not be able to make sense. So we had to tweak it a little bit, some of the questions. Let's say, for example, in the US, what is referred to as graduate studies, is not referred to as graduate studies here. It's referred to as postgraduate student studies. So little things like that. And thereafter, it took us some time, so we were not able to run the study in 2020. We ran the study in spring 2021, and to also get all the permissions, the ethics approval, everything, it took time. And the biggest hurdle for us was, unlike in the US, where you have grown a tradition over 20 years, of students taking the survey, there's nothing over here. So the first hurdle we ran into is, how do we approach the students to take the survey? And so we partnered with an Association of Indian Universities, AIU, and all the nationally accredited universities in India, the research universities, they are members of AIU. So we ran the survey in partnership with the Association of Indian Universities, and through the Association of Indian Universities, we send the survey link to the member universities across India. And we also, we approached it in a two-pronged way. One, through the Association of Indian Universities at the institutional level, and we also encouraged our own students to share the survey link to other student bodies through what is known in India as the student unions, and on the ground level. So this is how we approached. Of course, as I said, since we don't have that kind of tradition in India, we were not able to gather the amount of data that you all generally gather in the US, and the amount of data that you were able to gather even in the middle of COVID. But still, we were able to gather around somewhere around more than 7,000 sample size of data, which is quite significant, taking into consideration we don't have that kind of tradition, and also the deeper digital divide that we have in the Indian context, because the entire survey was fully online, and we were not able to use the entire data. We had to, because some of the responses were incomplete. So somewhere around 6,000 students, that data we worked with. And what we found quite interestingly, despite the differences in, and that's what I personally focused on, and Igor also advised to focus on that aspect, because it was interestingly, despite all the differences of context, one big similarity with regards to the students' experiences in terms of the impact that COVID-19 had on student mental health and well-being, and this was across the socioeconomic divide. We didn't come across a single student who did not report that they were not affected by the pandemic in terms of their mental health and well-being. So that was a really significant finding. Based on this finding, we have, of course, made a lot of recommendations at the policy level to really institute this kind of collection of data about student experience even beyond the pandemic on an annual basis, and to really make it part of the report that comes out of India, which is the annual status of higher education report. We don't know how successful we will be in doing this advocacy and to institutionalize sero data collection in India, but we are trying our best to do advocacy based on this report that we have put together to really institutionalize student experience data collection also within the Indian context. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And then we also have representing iCenter, who I think it's not quite the middle of the night, but maybe past business hours. We have Kyla Steenhart and Nannette Ripmeester representing or presenting international student well-being.
Yes, hello, my name is Nannette Ripmeester. I'm based in Europe, in the Netherlands, so it's past business hours, well, depending a little bit on when you do business, but it's past 9 p.m. My colleague Kyla Steenhart, she is in New Zealand, so I hope she's sound asleep and not listening in, but you never know with Kyla, she might just be very curious how things are going and tune in. So my role is slightly different than yours. I do not work at an institution, but I represent iGraduate, and iGraduate is responsible working with you with the CERU survey. But I'm not going to use data from the CERU survey. Kyla and I created a presentation using the International Student Barometer. And the International Student Barometer, or ISB, is the largest global benchmark survey. So this year, 2021, we have 93,000 international student responses, slightly below 93,000. Our presentation is really looking into the student well-being, because just before COVID hit, we had already added a question to the ISB about student happiness, because we noticed so we do the International Student Barometer really across the world. My role is with the ISB in North America and Europe. Kyla does New Zealand. We have a colleague in Australia. We have a colleague in Southeast Asia, and we have the research center in the UK. So we have people all over the world. But what we noticed was that students more and more seem to be really concerned. I think this generation is the generation that feels they have one shot at happiness, and one shot at career success, one shot at making the right study choice. They're a really concerned generation. And we had added a question to the International Student Barometer asking about happiness. And what we noticed was the element with the largest correlation to happiness are things that deal with face-to-face contact, social events, getting contact, good context for the future. So all the things that stopped when the pandemic hit. So there was a serious drop in happiness for the students, but we also noticed an increase already for a while in the need for counseling services. And one of the things that really struck me when we're looking at the overall data for all these 93,000 international students, that 1 in 5 globally doesn't know how to access the counseling services and would say, oh, I didn't know we had that. I would love to have that. And on the other hand, research that we're involved with, but slightly outside of the International Student Barometer, financial benchmarking data, shows that if we look at an FTE, the spend over FTE, that has tripled in the past 6 years, the spending on counseling. So even though we're spending more as institutions, apparently there is still a bigger need of students and that don't know how to access the counseling services that we provide. So I think there's lots of interesting data that I can share with you, and we've now focused in this presentation on international student well-being, but I think I could talk for hours or even probably days on the richness of the benchmark data. So Andrea, over to you.
Thank you. So I thought, just to kind of get things started, let's start at square one. So first, just what is well-being? How are you all, kind of thinking about it? Might different students define this differently, depending on cultural background, life experiences? So how do we account for the diversity of perspectives when evaluating student well-being?
I'll start by saying that I think the definition of well-being on our campus has really evolved, and I think evolved in a good way, in the sense that for a lot of years, I think our well-being was primarily focused on issues of health and mental health, and it didn't really go into financial wellness, into security that students felt about their surroundings, whether that was feeling safe on campus, whether that was feeling food secure, whether that was feeling housing secure. And so I'm pleased as CERU has evolved that we've really strengthened some of those questions, because it's really helped us to rethink what our definition of well-being really is, and to really go beyond a very health-oriented definition of well-being to a much more holistic approach to it.
Any other perspectives, particularly cross-culturally? Is there anything that has, kind of come up, or conversations you all have had on your teams?
Yes, I like what Cassandra said, because I think it's very, very important that we understand that well-being is not just like I do not have physical pain, but it's definitely more than that. And not just mental health, but a wide variety. It was interesting because having this large data set, we did a bit of a deep dive in how do different nationalities look at certain things. And yes, there's some interesting things. If we take them, the measure happiness, and the measure happiness is really the question with, do you feel happy? It's a question we debated very, very long. How are we going to find out happiness? And in the end, we thought, well, it's probably the best, also cross-culturally, to just say, are you happy? And what defines happiness then is a different story. But we'd ask people, are you happy? And then we do see, if I take the top nationalities within the ISB, the International Student Barometer, the American students are the least happy. And for instance, the Chinese, the Malay, they're way more happy. It's like 7% difference if we look at the groups. And that is a lot if you take a measure like that. Of course, it's speculative. What's the reason? But are certain nationalities more aware that things might not always go 100% as planned? Are they more resilient? That is speculative, because the data doesn't say so, but the data points in different directions for different nationalities.
May I say something? That was very interesting to hear what you had to say about different nationalities, the data that you have. Frankly speaking, as I said, within the Indian context, we really don't have at all a tradition of, even recording data about student experiences. We are walking baby steps over here. And quite interestingly, many higher educational institutions over here, they don't even have a center for wellness or anything like that, any kind of counseling services. They're just not available. Some of the newer universities, which are well resourced comparatively, like my own university, we do have an established center for wellness and student counseling. But the focus over there, once again, is really narrowly focused on mental health, frankly speaking, as of now. Not the focus on wellness is not as well-rounded as Cassandra just mentioned. I think it's going to take a lot of time to think in such holistic terms in terms of student wellness. The entire system, frankly speaking, really has not been a student-centered system. We have a new National Education Policy 2020, which was released in the middle of the pandemic by the Indian government, which does, put a strong emphasis on transforming Indian higher education system to a more student-centric approach. Unlike the traditional system, the larger system is still very much, has a very traditional approach to teaching and learning, and higher education has not been, historically student-centered, particularly unlike the United States. So I was really intrigued to find the cross-cultural data that you have with regards to non-US students from particularly Asian countries. I'm personally curious to learn more about student experiences from other similar Asian countries and what could be the possible reason, whether it is resilience or general, I should say, general ignorance also, or lack of interest to learn about student experiences. So it has been literally, in the oblivion, frankly speaking. I don't know much about Malaysia or other countries that you refer to, whether they do have, systems in place or not. But it was very intriguing to hear what you said. Thank you so much for sharing. I look forward to learn more from you in the future.
Yeah, I think I want to just echo all my co-panelists talking about sort of holistic well-being as being so important. I think it's something that certainly at Berkeley we're expanding our capacity and ability to treat well-being in a really broad and well-rounded way. I think something around the idea of sort of differences, something that's not from UQ's data, from other surveys, that was very interesting, was looking at how there's almost, it seems like maybe a generational effect in terms of how undergraduates compared to, say, staff and faculty talk about health and well-being, and that there's, I think mental health seems much more prominent for undergraduates in terms of their thinking, where you see a lot more rating of overall health as being connected to mental health, whereas it seems a little more partitioned for some of the other populations. So there's a lot that goes into like what people think about. And I think the idea of working to understand the individual of how do people themselves talk about health and what are their specific needs is very important. And I think beyond that, I think something that when I think about the Basic Needs Center and my colleagues, one thing I think they do is really also working on a sort of community aspect, that it's not just about the individual's health, but sort of their connection to a broader community. There's a real different vibe when you go into the center. It's just a lot more community oriented than other parts of campus that is refreshing, honestly. But I think that's something that is a really important part of the work that they do, is really building and nourishing community. So it's beyond just individuals.
Yeah, those are all really great points, I think, that you all brought up. And the next question that I had was really inspired by that interesting finding from iGraduate, where some of the kind of COVID-related outcomes bounced right back, and then others really remained a concern. So thinking across, all of your work, you found a lot of challenges brought on by COVID. And what do you expect will remain challenges in the future that we're going to need to keep working on? And what might kind of just rebound back anyway, or that you might have already seen begin to rebound?
Well, just simply to answer your question of the iGraduate data from the International Student Barometer, of course, if we look at happiness, there was a tremendous drop in 2020, not unexpectedly, but there was already a relatively sharp recovery in 2021. So the happiness, it's not entirely back, but it bounced back quite quick. More so maybe than I personally had expected. I thought we would feel it longer. But what I thought was striking, that the need for counseling and support, you would expect that to become more strong during a pandemic, but we've seen it continuously rising, irrespective almost of the pandemic. It's just the need that is there. And it's a little bit also what Andrew said. I think there is a generational divide also here. It's not just the pandemic. I think it's also a different generation. And of course, if that generation then also is confronted with a pandemic, yeah, that's a double whammy.
I also anticipate a double whammy, the double whammy of, again, the support, particularly for mental health, but I'm deeply concerned that students' financial concerns are not going to rebound. We had hopes that the HERF funding that we had at our campus would help with that. We didn't see huge patterns where students reported relief, in the sense that they were thrilled to get the money, but weren't necessarily feeling any less stress about their life situation. And I think our current financial situation, inflation, cost of gas, things like that, hints of recession are frightening students and families financially. And I think that's going to continue to be an area that we have to pay really close attention to. That financial wellness of making sure students are really well supported in their basic needs.
Yep. Tongshan, go ahead.
Yeah, actually, my question is about the basic needs. Thank you, Cassandra just mentioned the basic needs. Yeah, based on our analysis, like you see, undergraduate students, like about 40%, even more than 40%, actually experience the basic needs insecurity, either food insecurity, homelessness, or both. So thank you so much for your presentations today. I think the topic is very helpful. Your presentations are all excellent. So my question was particularly when we compare like happiness among students with a different background or different culture. So I think a basic needs issue probably is one of many different factors that may be related to student well-being. Student happiness is central. For example, in China, all universities provide students with on-campus dining. So all dining halls are excellent, foods are excellent. But in American, university here in the United States, actually most students have to go somewhere to get, food for them by themselves. So I'm wondering how Berkeley it has in the security or insecurity has played some kind of role in student happiness, well-being. Have you done some analysis about that? Or any thoughts, any literature you have seen related to that?
Well, maybe I can answer it a little bit. We've not done a lot of analysis in that particular area, but in running the International Student Barometer in countries in Europe, in countries in North America, in all the various countries, we do notice certain things to stand out. And campus experience is an interesting one. Cassandra already mentioned something about, I think you said it, Cassandra, about feeling safe and secure on campus. We can see that international students in the US report that as one of the things they feel less secure. And when I do a feedback presentation, sometimes people in North American or US institutions feel really worried about that. And what I try to convey to them is, yeah, you need to be worried, because if it's impacting your students to a really large extent. But going a little bit back to the food, because I loved what you said about the food in China being excellent. I'm not sure if you've ever been to my home country, the Netherlands, but the food at Dutch universities is not something that is really a nice one to think about. And I remember years, it has improved tremendously, because previously the only hot thing you could get at a Dutch university was a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. And if you were lucky, some, tomato soup. It has improved. It's become much, much better. I think also due to the benchmarking exercise in the ISB, because people started to realize. But I remember a feedback presentation where somebody at a Dutch university, really high up in the hierarchy, was saying, well, sorry, Mrs. Ripmeester, I'm not getting why you're talking about things like food on campus, because we train academics here. How important is food on campus? And I had no idea this person was going to say that, but I had to giggle a little bit, because I knew what my next slide was. And my next slide had several open comments. And one of the open comments was from a German international student. So Germany and the Netherlands are bordering countries, and everybody thinks we're exactly the same. But this student said, I cannot concentrate in the afternoons because I am used to hot meals for lunch, and it's really impacting my academic performance. So sometimes something that somebody thinks is relatively little might have a much bigger impact. I know it's not really an answer to your question, but it gives you already a little bit of ideas on how different things are being tackled and what can have an impact on well-being, and that it might be very different across different cultures and different countries.
Yeah, thank you. This is helpful. So I wish I could be there in university. So I will try.
I'd like to add here something from the Indian context. Quite interestingly, in the survey that we ran in the middle of COVID, the campus really came forward as a safe space for most of our students. Quite interestingly, and all the more, we found, particularly with LGBTQ students and women, and across different, socioeconomic background, the campus appeared in our survey. It came up, and we have highlighted this in our report as a safe space compared to their home environment, where the students were forced to go back during the COVID-19 pandemic. And many of them have reported that they have had real difficulty in adjusting life back in their homes. It was interesting, quite interesting. And also, not just a safe space, the campus space appeared also as a great, as an equalizing space for many students, because the Indian context, as most of you know, is a context of very deep inequalities. So many of the students, the kind of resources that is available to them on campus, it's not available to them when they're back home, which includes also a stable internet connection, which was so needed during the pandemic to join and to participate in online teaching and learning in classes. So most of the students who took the survey here in India, they reported, and that this is what really came up in our survey finding. The campus really, the brick and mortar university campus really came forward as a safe space, and also a space where the students have access to equal resources, irrespective of socioeconomic divide.
Igor, I think you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. It's about lunchtime in California, so it's exciting to discuss food. But I would like to switch gears a little bit and actually ask both Andrea and Cassandra, because in your presentations, you highlight kind of the new important role of institutional researchers, not just to analyze the data and publish it somewhere, but also take it to the discussion with decision makers and policymakers. And I was wondering, and it sounded like very natural, but I was wondering why it's not happening at scale. And what do you think are barriers for that, both professionally and also, maybe structural barriers? And what are the challenges maybe you've encountered during trying to do this on your campuses? So I'm really interested in hearing more about that aspect of your presentations.
I had a similar question for you all that was almost the same, but asking what were like very effective ways to reach. So if there's a way to sort of answer both in one go, that would be amazing.
So I'm happy to start and say that one aspect of the presentation that didn't make it into my slides in the shortened version, but that I had to spend a lot of time in sort of the lead up to the actual data is convincing faculty who are super suspicious of student self-reported data that they should believe and value the data that we have from CERU. And not that they're suspicious of the instrument or the validity or any of that, but that just that they had a hard time sort of wrapping their head around that we had put enough effort into getting really comprehensive data, and that when I started to slice the data for something that wasn't just at the university level, that it was accurate and had sort of validity, that they could believe it represented their students and their student experiences. But part of that, to be honest, isn't necessarily a reflection of CERU itself. It's also a reflection of some attitudes by some faculty, and I can't say this happens at every campus, but it certainly happens at mine, that faculty don't believe students when they say they're struggling. And they don't believe that a student at the #1 wealthiest public university in the state of Texas could possibly be starving. They don't believe that a student at the #1 public research university in the state of Texas could possibly be homeless. And so it's also, there's a cognitive dissonance that some of our faculty have around believing that this is actually happening at their super rich, their perception of a campus with a huge endowment and lots of money, and faculty are making good salaries and things like that, that could actually be happening with our students. So, I think that the challenges and questions of faculty and other stakeholders sort of believing what the data say is part of why I don't know that this is really caught on, because it takes a lot of work to convince folks to hear the message. And then if all they're doing is hearing the message, but there is no call to action that follows, I think that's the other challenge. And I think that's an example, Andrea, of a communication success that we had, is that we didn't just say, hey, your students are struggling, look at these data that prove it. We said they're struggling, and let's talk about how we make referrals to our counseling center. Let's talk about the resources that we have in the advising units that support students. And so by connecting that sort of believe the data, see it in your own classroom, and here's the call to action of something we want to do, it really sort of closed the loop, closed the circle, I think, in terms of making the data valuable. I think dashboards are really important, but we also need to connect it to a action. I'm a professor of communication, advertising, and public relations. If you don't connect it to an action, folks aren't going to do anything about it. They're going to look at it, they're going to nod. They may agree with it, and then they're going to move on. So making that very specific call to action, I think, is one of the best examples I can give of a successful communication effort.
Absolutely. I think that's a really important point. And I think something in my experience is it's not just a specific call, a call to action, but something that is, it shouldn't be a vague sort of high level, like we should do something about this. It should be like, here is where the campus food pantry is. Here is the link to apply for emergency grants from the financial aid office. Here's how you can connect students with resources. Here's how you can take action, as opposed to like a very sort of like something should be done. I think is an important part of it. In terms of Igor, your question around what are some sort of the barriers to this? I think part of it is siloing happens so much, and I think in my experience, at Berkeley, we have our Office of Planning and Analysis, and it sits somewhere, and I think they've done amazing work in reaching out to people and becoming a really trusted and valued partner on campus. But so often it's additionally beneficial. So in my role, I work in equity and inclusion, a different division on campus, even though I'm an institutional researcher. And there's I have other colleagues who are also institutional researchers who are situated in other offices, and we're able to provide that sort of additional just resource capacity and bandwidth, and to be bringing attention to our colleagues from that different perspective, and we can just cover more ground. And I also, whenever I am doing things, I'm like, who should see this? How can I just like push this out to, and how can I try to insert myself and say, hey, can I talk at your upcoming meeting, to try to get it out there? And also just not just high level, but again, part of the talk from myself and my colleagues was about sort of going to the sort of ground level practitioners and saying, hey, I'm seeing this in the data. Does that jive with what you're saying? To sort of like, is there something that we're missing in terms of analysis or interpretation? But also, what does that mean in terms of how you are acting there? Like one of the things that came out early when we're doing food pantry analysis was that we were seeing beyond, like, it wasn't just, oh, this is like low income students. We were seeing other places that intersected with that, of like, oh, we're seeing a lot of LGBTQ plus students using the food pantry. How can we form relationships with our gender equity resource center, with our disabled students center, so that we can see these populations that have a lot of need in terms of basic needs and securities, and work to look at those, that overlap, and where we can buttress students from multiple directions. So there's lots of, I think, really being proactive and trying to break down those silos that exist and get people to believe the data is so key. That was a big thing. Getting a basic needs started at Berkeley was getting people to believe it's not just an anecdote. Like, we have the same problem that Texas is seeing in terms of how can Berkeley, by some measures, the top public university in the world, UCLA would beg to differ, so I am not going to claim that title. But I think it was hard to believe that how could students be struggling to the degree that they were. Oh, it's 1 or 2 students. No, it's 40% of our students, as Tongshan is saying. We have a massive problem of basic needs and security. And I think breaking down that disbelief took time and effort.
And Tongshan, I see you have your hand up. Do you have a question? Or?
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. So actually, the UC regions include basic needs item almost in every meeting this year. So it is one of their highest priorities to help campuses solve this problem. I think that is great, because if you don't solve basic needs challenges, I agree with what Cassandra, Andrea, also others said earlier, how students could focus on their study. I experienced food insecurity. Even I was a graduate student, I just had 1 bread every day. So I knew how difficult it was. So I'm very glad that the UC Regents now focuses on this issue. Actually, UC has allocated, I think, I don't know how much money exactly in past few years, but there was a special fund for this. And the survey data from UQs actually was used as one of criteria for special fund allocation. So I hope before I retire, I would not see this 40% food insecurity and 7% homelessness again. That is my wish, my hope.
And and thanks for sharing that. It's definitely important to have that kind of degree of, I don't know, almost like kind of security before you can really thrive in the university setting, which is, of course, all of our goals for students. And I think just to wrap things up, in just a sentence, 1 sentence, what do you think is our future focus should be related to student well-being? I thought about making you do it in a word, so be glad I gave you a sentence.
I'll do a word. Holistic. And by that, I mean, I want us to focus on a holistic definition of well-being and not lose sight of the interconnectivity between, financial security and mental health and physical wellness and feeling belonging and feeling safety, because it's all connected. And sometimes we push really hard on one and we forget to work on the other, but they really are so interconnected.
Great, thank you.
I agree with what Cassandra said. Frankly speaking, we need to think about wellness, from a much more holistic perspective. And as I said, within the Indian context, we really have a long way to go in that direction. And so I agree with her, and I would say holistic should be the approach to go ahead, move ahead. Thank you.
Does iGraduate or UC Berkeley have a, a take?
I wanted to give the floor to Andrew first, but I'm happy to go. I think holistic is a great word to use. And I think that we need to pay attention to this generation because well-being is important for every human being, but somehow I have the feeling that this generation needs it more and needs more attention around this area than previous generations have had. And I think that is irrespective of the pandemic. And what I hope, and that leads a little bit back to the previous question, that we start to use data to really act on data insight, because yes, it's self-reported data, but students are quite capable of providing very useful self-reported data that will help us to not act on our instincts, but really act on serious data that will help us to understand where are the needs and where to focus on.
Absolutely. It seems like we've all been sharing notes, even though we haven't been, but for me, again, I think holistic was the thing that came to my mind initially. It's this understanding that the whole body, the whole, physical, mental, emotional, and that, again, it's not just the way that those themselves are interconnected, but the way that the interconnection between people and communities are such an important part of student well-being. And I think, touching on some earlier questions, how these are all interconnected, intercorrelated, that physical, mental, basic needs, they're all correlated with each other, that, students who are experiencing, sometimes it's causal, it's hard not to have your mental health decrease when you are having basic needs insecurities. Some of it is simply correlational in terms of the students who are more likely to experience basic needs insecurities are also the students who are experiencing social exclusion in their academic and social lives. But that we need to recognize that compounding nature of things, and that I think it's absolutely true that the current student generation is in particular need, again, beyond just the pandemic. This has been happening in what we've been seeing from the survey data for years now, and that we really need to understand it as interconnected, intersectional, and something that is of the utmost priority. Was so I totally share Tong Shen's point from earlier that I hope that we can see these basic needs insecurities and well-being measures drastically change, hopefully by the time we retire, but hopefully a lot sooner than that. But it's holistic, it's so important.
Yeah, so I'm hearing holistic, community, looking at development. Does the audience just anyone want to throw out like single words? You can put it in the chat, or if you want, you can unmute. We have like 2 minutes. See if we had you on board with if everyone thinks it's holistic. But yeah, feel free to just contribute one word that you think is the future focus at each of your campuses. But otherwise, I want to really thank all the speakers for being here. Some of you very late at night, which we deeply, deeply appreciate, and getting to hear the international perspectives that you all bring. And then, of course, I guess the people at UC, it's sort of over lunchtime, so maybe you're a little hungry. So appreciation for all the speakers. Great, and it looks like we have some people on board with holistic, so I think we've solved it. So thank you very much. I'll turn it back to Igor, who might want to wrap up today's session.
Thank you so much, the presenters, for such an amazing session. Again, I think there will be more discussion on well-being, that's for sure. And I really liked the word holistic. I would probably add equitable as well, because we see like lots of disparities in well-being as well. But yeah, so we'll continue discussing this topics at CERU events. And I really appreciate, all the presenters and participants of the first day. We've had a great 3 sessions. I learned a lot. I learned every time. Thank you so much, and see you tomorrow.